Al Alfieri has served as a medic in the Adirondack region of upstate New York for the past 11 years and has had a career in emergency medicine for almost 20. Al has assisted hundreds of persons in medical distress over his career in medicine and is also an Eagle Scout. We've asked Al on to discuss his work. This is Lifeline. Al, thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you on and to kind of talk about your medical work and the medical things that you do. So happy to have you on.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor. I appreciate it.
Yes. I guess kind of tell us what made you want to kind of, be a medic to start with.
Oh, man. So, like most stories, something that starts out a long time ago as a kid, you can laugh. But as you mentioned, the Eagle Scout thing. So when I was young, I started in Boy Scouts, and all the skill sets that you learn there, the one that I was attracted to was first aid. I find that fun. So I started out with that, and then as I got older and started getting to high school, I joined a local wilderness search and rescue team, get a little experience of that, and realized that I really enjoyed being in emergency medicine. It's a different world. I think all of us have a few fries short of a happy meal when it comes to doing it, because you have to enjoy chaos and be able to put some order to it, and it feels comfortable in the chaos, and that never really changed. So when I graduated high school, went off to college, I started running my own search and rescue team, and then did a lot of training with the Army while I was there, because I went to Texas A&M, and then just progressed from there. I was a emergency medical provider down in Texas, and did that for many, many years. And then when I moved to New York, I tried to get away from the bug for a couple of years, doing normal jobs, and it just didn't sit. So I just didn't get that satisfaction anymore. So long story short, New York State doesn't honor anything from any other state. So I had to start from square one. So I got my EMT basic, and then moved up to my advanced EMT, which is the next level, because most states in the United States have 3 levels of care, and they're all medics or EMTs, depending how you want to call them. So the lowest level is EMTB, which is basic, which you can do most of your simple tasks, right? It's your taking blood glucose, patching up wounds, doing assessments, maintaining open airway, pretty much all the basic life-saving things that you need. And then the next tier is EMTI, or now it's called AEMT, Advanced EMT, is that everything a basic can do, but now you have more drugs in your drug bag that you can utilize. So we can give for breathing treatments, buterol, Atrovent, things like that. For respiratory patients, we can start IVs. You can intubate patients, so using advanced airways. That's starting to be phased out, and we can talk about if that's something you're interested in later, but we're phasing out the type of advanced airway we do. And then if you go for further schooling, your EMTP, which is a paramedic, you get everything the other 2 levels have, but now you have advanced drugs you can administer. So we're talking like cardiac medication, all your narcotics come with that. So you have to be a paramedic to be able to push fentanyl, morphine, and ketamine. And then if they get doctor orders, ketamine.
Isn't that a tranquilizer for animals?
It is. So
Okay.
People are animals.
We are. Actually, that is true. So yes, ketamine is used as a tranquilizer, usually in large animals. But for doses in humans, it actually works as a dissociative. So the 2 circumstances we use it for is that we witnessed, is if someone is, what's the polite way of saying this? They're like a violent EDP, for instance. We can dose them with ketamine, and it kind of softens them up. And we can do that IM. And then ketamine is also used in very certain situations for pain management. But it's one of those drugs that doesn't get pushed too often.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So.
And here I'm thinking, so wait. I'm going to go really basic right now.
What?
So you mean when I'm watching my favorite medical show, everybody on there is not the same?
Correct. We all have a basic set of skills, but depending what level of care they are depends on what they're able to do. Now, without getting too deep in the weeds, each state's kind of dictate where those levels are. There is a national standard, which is held by the National Registry, which are those 3 levels. Now, certain states, New York being one of them, is pushing against adopting to the national standard. Up until last year, we actually had a 4th level in between AEMT and paramedic, and it was called a critical care. And New York State did that because in the city, instead of having everyone be paramedics, you can have them be CCTs. Didn't have to go as much schooling or certification, but could do quite a few more, like cardiac drugs. So in an area like Manhattan, where you have hospitals all over the place, you have quick response, you can transport people to the hospital. It's kind of this intermediary thing. Don't send everyone to paramedic school. Get them extra schooling to handle the calls, but get them out onto the floor sooner. But luckily, we stepped away from that, and we're trying to adopt more to the national standard, but it's really slow going.
So, how, I guess, again, very practical in my thinking. I'm trying to decide how I want to say this. So, how do you decide who goes to what if everybody's got all these different levels? Do you know what? Am I making sense?
That is a great question. So, there's a couple schools of thought, and it depends on the EMS agency and where they're located. So one of them is that if you're staffing 1 ambulance or two crews from a station, you normally have an ALS provider, so either an AEMT or paramedic, with a BLS provider like an EMT basic. The thought process behind this is that if you go to a call, let's say it's a cardiac arrest, right, an echo response, so something that's bad, your basic EMT, how do I say this? Whenever you approach a patient, no matter what, you start with your BLS skills, your very basic skills. So if we're looking for an airway to keep them open, you're going to do either an NPA, which is a small tube that goes up the nose into the nasal pharynx in the back of the throat so you can keep airway open, or an OPA, which are the little plastic things you see that you stick into their mouth to hold their tongue up. Everyone can do that. And the goal is that you start with BLS first, and if you have to escalate to more invasive procedures, then you can roll over to your AMT or paramedic to do. And that way, if you're on a cardiac call, you can have your basic EMT start doing compressions until fire department arrives. They'll do compressions. During this time, your paramedics are usually putting the pads on the person, establishing IV access so we can push epinephrine or AMI, depending on the situation, or in conjunction. And you can bounce back and forth. So you can still have, hey, my basic, I can have you do this, this, and this while I do this, this, and this. So you can still work together.
Okay.
The other thought process, certain agencies, if they have like 4 or 5 rigs, they may staff one as a basic EMT only rig, and that goes out to calls that dispatch are lower, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. Like a lower priority, it's not requiring as much of a response.
Sure.
So, the person who slipped and fell or needs a lift assist or just something that isn't going to require a lot of medical interventions, you send that ambulance there. And then if it ends up escalating or they need help, they can call dispatch and you guys can send out another provider, higher level of care.
Okay. So my brain is going a mile a minute right now. I'm thinking, if I'm using ProQA because it's all I remember, is that how? So by the time you get through going through your questions and it's shunting you here, 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 and here, based on the answers to the questions, is that how CAD knows which one of you to send based on the level of care that is going to be needed on the call, or is that a dispatch function?
That's it depends on the area. I've seen some that use CAD where based off the answers that you give during your initial call with the not customer, I'm sorry.
I know what you mean. The patient.
The patient, thank you. Some of those CAD systems will automatically route that. So if someone says, hey, are you experiencing chest pain? And the answer is a yes, and then automatically you'll block out to be an advanced life support. So you're going to get an AMT, most likely a paramedic.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And so it really depends on the locale, because I worked in so many different agencies. I usually the ones I found that are in a city are the ones that tend to run maybe a BLS only rig because there's enough call volume to just have one that's staffed with EMTs. In rural
Yeah.
areas, you don't tend to see that. Where I work now, closest route to the hospital on a clean day is maybe 15, 20 minutes. Furthest
Which
part in
is a
my
long time.
it is, and that's the closest to the hospital from our district. If I go to the
Ooh.
opposite corner, on a good day, it can be an hour and 15 minutes to the hospital.
Yeah, and if it's like snowing or traffic, might add a couple minutes at least.
Snowstorms, we had one call that was way up the north end of district. It took us over 3 hours to get to the hospital.
Quit.
It's a long time to do chest compressions.
Well, funny story about that.
Yeah, please, because
So luckily that's kind of gone by the wayside. We most agencies now either have Lucas or an auto pulse. It's a device that you strap around the patient's chest. A little different design. The Lucas is the more common one. It's kind of like an A-frame over the chest. It has a piston that you slide down the chest on the sternum, and it does compressions for you.
quit. Why are we doing CPR training?
In case we don't have a Lucas machine,
All right, fine.
and we want to
Okay.
keep them alive until we get that little AED.
Okay, good point.
It's true. And, honestly, it's going back to that whole BLS before ALS thing. Compressions
Yeah.
are the most important thing. I recommend everyone get their CPR certification. It's not that expensive, and it's well worth it.
That's true. Okay, fine.
So,
So I guess if you're, go ahead, go.
go ahead, Erica.
I've lost my train of thought.
Okay.
It'll come back.
So I guess kind of one interesting thing about like New York as opposed to Texas. In Texas, we kind of have just one, like a county EMS thing that does the EMS work for the whole county. But up in New York, you guys have like 15, 16 different small little companies that are not government entities. They're like semi-private or private companies that act as the ambulance and the EMS people. And so like that's a really different approach than I guess what I'm used to.
Yeah, you don't have the bureaucracy?
Oh, we have bureaucracy. It's,
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty much a straight shooter, so I'm from Texas, so I don't filter a lot of things. The state of New York is honestly a good decade behind other states when it comes to emergency management as EMS. And, I find that, twofold. Part of it is because of the bureaucracy, the politics, and all that mess. But the other part is that a lot of things that transfer over. And so, let me rewind. Whenever something new happens to civilian EMS, it's usually something that's been moved from military, whether it be trauma or interventions, and that's been kind of filtered back to EMS in the civilian sector. And you guys have, Fort Sam Houston, right, is where all the AIT training is for Army medics, and that's at Fort Sam Houston, and they're great. So that's where a lot of things filter out from. So a lot of the guys that do some pretty forward studies are out in Texas, and one of them, not to name drop here, but like Scotty Boliter is a really well-known name in emergency medicine, and he's out of Texas. I believe he's still out of the Houston area, and he has a lot of he's pioneered a lot of interventions and treatment modalities based off things that he studied and things that have filtered out from the military. So Texas is usually at the forefront. Correct me if I'm wrong, from what I've heard, there's a lot of agencies in Texas that are actually carrying like antibiotics on their rigs. So frontline antibiotics for really bad traumas, which is awesome, or sepsis patients. And things where time is a huge factor, and we don't have that up here. I mean, we just recently started carrying something called TX. It's used for trauma patients to help inhibit your body's ability to break down clots. So if you're having a really bad bleeding patient, your body's still going to try and break down clots. And this, when you infuse it, helps prevent that from happening. So basically, you keep more of the red stuff inside their body until you get to hospital. So that's kind of like a big background to answer your question, Gary, or your comment, sorry. In New York, EMS is not considered an essential service. Most
No.
states, yeah. So most states are. Up here, police department and fire department are essential, but EMS is not. So you end up seeing, yeah.
I don't understand. What? I don't. I'm. What?
So
I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. I can't speak to some of it because I don't know the whole depth of it, but it has to do with the way funds can also be split up. So I know in New York, it's a lot harder for EMS to get financial grants than it does for fire departments. So you see in a lot of the larger cities, I live north of Albany. So most of the cities up there, if you're going up the Northways and you're Albany, you're Clifton Park, Saratoga, Glens Falls, Lake George, a lot of them have municipal-based fire departments. So your fire department is also your EMS agency. So your firefighters will take, like, I'll take Glens Falls, New York as an example, because that's where one of the major hospitals are for the northern or the Adirondack region. Glens Falls Fire, they're all paramedics. And Glens Falls Fire has their own ambulances at their stations. So whenever, EMS/fire control dispatches them, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, they're the ones who go. And it's a lot easier then because then the fire department's getting the money as it is, so they can split it up between EMS and fire. All other places, all other places you end up having either a town-based EMS or just a locality-based EMS, and you have to get a certificate of need from the town to basically do the EMS services for them.
Wow, that sounds messy.
Complicated?
Yeah, it sounds messy and yeah, complicated.
It is. And
so,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. So I guess because there's so many different companies, can you go anywhere?
So I wish things were simple. No. Now, so we're all dispatched from counties. So, for instance, take the whole Glens Falls region again because the hospital's there. So a lot of the counties that are Glens Falls and North still run off of VHF radios. So there is a hub that's Warren County, and they dispatch from their Warren County center. Now, EMS agencies in Warren County can respond to whatever their district is, or if there's mutual aid, they can go to another district when called to. But if you're in Saratoga County, they don't run off that. They use a trunk system. So it's 800 megahertz, all encrypted. Like, it's pretty much the way everyone should be going. And so they can't communicate with people in Warren County. So there's kind of like this transmission barrier between the two. So it's a lot harder for those agencies to cross over. So any agency that's on the boundary between two counties of the such usually carry both sets of radios, and they have a call sign for both dispatch centers.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, for different jurisdictions. For us, we have a regional channel that push come to a shove, they can all just switch, and we don't have to be on their system, and they don't have to be on ours, or whether or not they can or can't. And it's that interoperability that we can talk to each other and we can respond. In my head, I'm like, how do you respond in that way to a, God forbid, a mass casualty situation? What happens?
So whenever we have MCIs, there's a couple of main thoroughfares, but the biggest one is the Northway or I-87, and it runs from, let's say, Albany all the way up into Canada. Actually, that's how we got here to Montreal for this podcast. But if there's an MC on the highway, sometimes you have to rely on dispatch for that interoperability to be like, hey, I need, Warren County, you guys need to talk to Saratoga County. And most of the agencies that are near that line, what your capabilities are of the agencies around you. So when you bust out your MCI board, if you're the first on scene, you set up incident command, and we can, we can start doing that, right? We have somebody who's in charge of triage, and then we need the help from dispatch to fill in the blanks. Like, okay, so which agencies actually have these assets available? Which ones don't?
Gotcha.
Because we just have a
Okay.
rough idea. And it makes things difficult because I said I started my career in Texas, so I'm, the whole Travis County EMS and Travis County Communications makes sense to me. That's what I call normal. So it's been an
Yeah.
adjustment for me coming up here, and maybe people up here think that's perfectly fine, but to me, I do kind of see it as a deficit for response.
But it makes me think about and whether or not they are emergency communicators or telecommunicators. I'm in my mind, I'm thinking about the dispatchers in those centers, whether they be private companies or semi-private, whatever they are. That just because I am a dispatcher, I'm thinking about the level of skill or the information that they have to have and the ability to coordinate critical thinking. Talk about on your toes.
And luckily, at least for the dispatchers, most of the counties around here, they're county level, so they're pretty well versed on. They're really good at their job, I should say. I don't,
Yeah.
and have mad respect for them. I know as we were talking on our, pre-recording in this earlier, you know, as you mentioned, there's a lot of trust and respect that goes on both ends of the radio for us in the field and you guys in dispatch. We may not see each other every day or ever, but there's a lot that gets transmitted via the tone and then the messages that we have, and there's a huge trust on both ends to know, hey, if something hits the fan or something needs to change, we know we're going to get that information both directions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's hugely important and something I think a lot of people miss.
So you don't.
I am absolutely impressed by that whole. Wow.
So
Sorry, go.
you don't have a dispatcher for you, like whatever EMS, because you might work for two or three different EMS
Mhm.
companies. So you don't have your own dispatcher. It's just the county's dispatchers reaching out to you. It's kind of like I'm trying to think of it because it's just such a different mentality than like we have in Texas. So it's kind of like almost an Uber, but if Uber were done like 40 years ago, like it's like a cab company, but if you just dispatched all different types of cabs, like not just from
Yeah.
like yellow cab, but you had like Joe's Cab, Joe's Cab Shack. I don't know, but yeah, it's very messy. It sounds like to me.
That's why I said, and I don't mean, and goodness knows, anybody that's listening or watching this from New York, I'm so sorry. It's not being disrespectful. It's just, it's foreign to us. I'm trying to process and I'm trying to imagine being a dispatcher and I have 10 companies all with their own, I don't know, policies and procedures, or is it?
Policies, procedures, personnel, rigs, all of that.
Now,
Wow.
it's also important to mention too is that there are still standards across the board. So there is, like New York State DOH Part 800. It dictates what is required on an ambulance or an ambulance response vehicle. So there are a baseline of
Okay.
capabilities that have to be there.
Got
And
it.
for the most part, depending where you're at, your protocol, actually now the protocols are pretty much the same across all the state now. So that you can disregard. Before that wasn't always the case. It was kind of broken up into different regions and that had its own issues. But that's kind of being resolved.
Would that be the same as like and forgive my ignorance. So you see it like on television. They always they talk about a standard of care. Would that be the same principle? I mean, certain things are going to be no matter what. Like airway, the ABCs, those things that doesn't change from company to company because it is medical and this is what you do. It doesn't matter if you're in California or New York or whatever, right?
Correct. The only kind of like fine differences you may see is so the two that come to mind, for instance, like monitors. There are different types of monitors out there. There's different companies. Usually, like Philips, Physio, and LifePak are the three main ones. So they're all considered monitors for cardiac, but they operate differently. and they have different capabilities. So that's one difference from agency to agency that you might need to take into consideration if you're a provider, but not from dispatch. And then the other difference is how advanced airways are placed. So, agencies that may not have the money for it, you have the old school laryngoscope, right? You have the blade, the handle attached to the blade, and then a light at the end of it so you can slide in and see the cords. There are other things out there as video laryngoscopes. Sorry.
I'm stuck on the blade. I heard blade, and I was like,
sorry. So
It's like a spatula.
it is like a spatula. We call it a blade, but it's not sharp. And there's different types.
oh,
It's basically
okay, because I'm like, how is that a good idea? But I mean, I'm not a medical person, so I was just gonna go with it. Okay, spatula, got it.
It's good. These are good questions to ask because there's, things and phrases that we use every day. I forget that it's not normal outside. So I apologize. Thank you for calling me out on that.
We're guilty. We're all guilty. Everybody listening to this knows they all go home and use their work language at home, and their friends and family are looking at them like, what language are you speaking right now?
Pretty much.
So it's not, happens to all of us. Okay.
Good to know. Yes, they call them blades. There's different types. The two ones are like Mac and Miller. Ones are straight blades and one are curved. It's just a flat piece, and you slide it along the tongue or to move the lower jaw out of the way so you can see the vocal cords. Mm-hmm. And the newer ones
move the jaw out of the way. I'm so gonna start watching medical stuff. My husband loves that stuff. I don't really watch it except for if you count Grey's Anatomy, but it's obviously a little different. People don't watch Grey's for the medicine. Let's just be real.
For the drama, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a soap opera.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best ever. Okay, getting off topic. My bad.
No, you're good. You're good. So two comments on that. One being when you said the surprise of the jaw. What you can do to actually is the back of your jaw along the lines of ears. You can feel like the straight part of your bone, and if you kind of relax your jaw and hold your skull, you can actually push your lower jaw forward.
Oh, no, I'm good. I'll take your word for it.
Now get the blade.
This one.
Oh man, never a dull moment. I love you, dude.
Wow.
So
you can push.
That's all we're doing. Granted, when you're doing this, the patient's unconscious, so they're not aware of this. You hope.
Right. Oh wow.
Yeah, some agencies have fancy video ones. It literally has usually like a fiber optic camera at the end of the blade, and then it has a screen, so you don't have to be physically over the airway to see it. Every provider is different. Maybe I'm just old school from my 20 years. I hate the video ones because if there's any blood or pus or anything inside and it gunks up the lens, you have to either try and wipe it off or pull it out. It's easier just to stick the blade in for the old laryngoscope, pull the jaw out of the way, and just have to move my head around to get a good view of the vocal cords. Yeah. So
would you say that's where experience comes in? Because you've been doing it so long, you don't get because I would imagine in your field, it's probably not uncommon to have, the newest of the new to the profession, relying on all the bells, all the whistles, and maybe they're not as I don't want to say skilled. I don't think skilled is the right way to put it. But do you have that kind of disconnect where you have your what would be considered old school and new school in the way that they approach care? Is that not a thing because it's medical and the standards are the same?
No, it is. And my opinion, I say take it with a grain of salt because it could be very different from a lot of people you'll speak to, is that I see the positive and negatives of both sides. Because, so on one side, yes, you do see a lot of us older timers, we have a different way of thinking, we have a different way of processing a scene. And that's based off of, years of experience and call crazy the gut feeling you get. I mean, you've been on enough scenes, you start seeing certain things, you trust the hair on the back of your neck when something doesn't feel right, and you just make sure your head's on a swivel and you keep situation awareness at all times. And the young bloods that come in don't have that. They're still there's a lot that goes into training somebody, and they do these courses really
Mhm.
short. So it's hard when you get a new EMT out of training and they get on the field because, they're going through their checklist in their head. Okay, like I'm at the scene, is my BSI and PPE on, okay, am I looking around, does the scene seem safe? Dude, they're going through this checklist that was drilled in their head, and it takes time
Yeah.
and repetition to get that to become, instead of a checklist, your natural analysis every time you get off the ambulance. So
Yeah.
that part of the country, yes, there's definitely a different school of thinking for old and new. Now, I won't say that's better, because there are a lot of new things that they're taught in classes that may not make it out to us for like standard protocol updates we get, and we have to follow them. But when new things come into play that are taught in the EMT class,
Mhm.
it may have not been there when we went through the training. So for us, it's like now I have to wedge this new idea into all my thought patterns that I've already had for
Yeah.
treatment, or I was okay, I have this other option available to me that I didn't have before.
Mm.
Yeah.
So then the older providers, you can see where they have that failure of, okay, I'm already on this highway of thought. Oh crap, I forgot there's these other two options I could have utilized beforehand.
Yeah.
So
And sometimes that could probably make it better, but you get locked in. It's kind of the old dog new tricks thing, and not in an insult, but it's just true. I've been doing it a few years longer than Gary, and there are certain, I would imagine that there are certain perspectives that I have because I've got 10 extra years. And I'm just like, for me, a MapSco is a wonderful tool. I absolutely love it. I don't have any problem cracking open a map and I can read it this way, that way, upside down. Now, the younger generation, they look at the map and they go, ew, why? And they don't understand why I would even
This is
ask them
cooked.
to, yes.
I'm hip with you kids.
oh god, dude.
But it's true. And there. I did that for funsies one day. I literally sent out a message to the floor and I said, "Anybody seen a Mapsco?" Now I know they haven't seen a Mapsco, and I don't know how many gophers popped up and were like, "What is that?" And I'm thinking to myself, how will you guys survive if all the bells and the whistles don't bell or whistle, because that stuff happens. Does that happen to you guys in your field, to where your bells and your whistles don't work and you have to revert to old school and your newest of the new don't even know what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. There's a handful of things, man, like that. The laryngoscope being one. Other one is communication with the hospital. So up until recently, we have it as a backup. We have a radio that's keyed into the frequency at the hospital. You put in the N code, there's a DTMF pad, and you say, okay, you call the hospital, this is what we're inbound with, 47-year-old male patient, chief complaint, chest pain, cardiac history, and then you spit the vitals out and give you ETA to the hospital. And we recently switched off of that, and they're utilizing it's a software on the tablets. It's called Pulsera, and it's connected to the hospital. So in there, you put in there, the patient's name, date of birth, chief complaint, and then if you need to alert the hospital, so you're like, a STEMI alert, trauma alert, sepsis alert, stroke alert, things like that. It lets you put that in there, and then you hit alert, and it sends it to the hospital. Okay, it's fine and dandy. Once again, I'm old school. I'm not a huge fan of it, but when that system goes down, and now you're trying to tell the new kids, like, hey, get on the radio and call the hospital, they're looking at you with three heads like, hey, what do you mean? The system's down. You pick the radio off the wall, key up, and
Yeah.
then put in the code, and then call the hospital. So yes, we have seen that before.
Like, what do you want me to call them and say what? And then they have to learn how to speak the language, whereas the tablet does it for them.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And this is why I think my opinion is probably different from a lot of people, is I think, I don't want to say a failure, but an area of opportunity I think that I've noticed is EMS has a bad habit of, they call it eating their young. And
Erica says that all the time.
I can trust it is not just EMS.
well,
Unreal.
that's good
Carry
to know,
on.
but sad to hear at the same time. And I think a big part that I'd like to see is the older providers need to spend more time working with the newer providers. And I don't mean telling. I mean, sitting down, working together, and discussing things. And I'm very lucky where I work now. I mean, I've worked probably over dozen different agencies over my life. And the one that I hold now, I have some really great partners that I can rely on. And we've always done that. It's you have a bad call, we drop the patient off, turn over care, get in the ambulance. On the way back to the station, we discuss, okay, so what do we think went well? What do you think we could have done differently? And we'll break down, do just a post-incident breakdown. And
Yeah.
I've tried to make sure that we carry that, especially with our young folk too, because it's an opportunity for new providers to ask the tough questions. And there are no stupid questions, because if you're asking it, it means there's someone else is too.
Yes.
And we need to be open to have those conversations, not put new providers down. And we need to have the new providers too not walk out of their classrooms with arrogant God mode mentality that we know everything.
And I wonder, so with you saying that it's triggering it's triggering the trainer in me, would you say that begins in training?
Absolutely. I think it belongs in training, and I think it begins in the schooling too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm stubborn, and I also have a belief that, those who see the problem own the solution. You may not have to fix it, but you need to put effort towards trying to fix it if you're the one who sees it. And
yeah,
you can ask Gary,
wow,
this is
well
something
said.
I've been bitching about for years, and I finally was able last year to cut some time out, and I got my instructor courses, my certs. So I did
Nice.
my CPR, advanced cardiac life support, pediatric advanced life support instructor courses, and I finished the first stage of being able to teach like EMT classes. And I have
Wow.
one step left where basically I have to shadow with another another teacher, professor, however you want to call it, to run a class where I can run my own classes. And that's my end goal, because no disrespect to any trainers, because I had some good ones going through too. I just think that we need to start from the ground up, and we need to teach kids. I say kids, God, I'm sorry. These kids are still not their 20s. I'm just getting old. We need to teach all these new kids, like, hey, it's okay to have a bad day. This job will eat you alive if you're not careful.
Yes.
And, I'm sure you guys discussed on other podcasts too. Mental health's a big issue in any emergency service, because we don't tend to always take the time to process some of the horrible things that we witness or see. And the more time we spend,
I can't even imagine.
I'm sorry?
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine, because, and I'm sorry, I think I might have missed an opportunity. You might have been saying something and I didn't catch it. I'm sorry. So I can't imagine you roll up on the scene, and sometimes limbs are not where they're supposed to be. And, horrible, horrible things that you see. And you've got an older person and a newer person. You're both responding. I love the idea of, we call them debriefs, like an instant debrief that is happening on your way back to the station after what did you call it? Turnover care?
After we turn over care, yes, ma'am.
Oh, that makes sense. We're not doing it anymore. That makes perfect sense. Duh, Erica. Anyway, but I can see that that can be really, really beneficial. But the problem that we have between the old and the new, and I still believe with all my heart it begins in training, it doesn't matter the discipline, is we're not taught to mentor out the door. Meaning the newest of the new, doesn't matter how long you are out of the classroom or fresh off the boat, whatever you want to call it, you still know more than the person coming behind you, unless, of course, they have previous experience. So if you instill that mentor mentality, hopefully we can begin to weed out that I know more than you, or you don't know as much as I do, or old dog, new tricks, all of those horrible things that muck up the profession, regardless of the discipline. Is this making any sense at all?
It makes 100% sense. And, to echo from my own personal experience, when I started coming up here in New York, it's like, yeah, you're fresh out of school at the lowest level at the time, my EMT basic. And some of the old timers, because I was still new to the area, no one knew who I was, no one knew where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a side note here, I also have a lot of experience in other training. So, like, I specialize in CBRN response, your chemical, biological, radioactive type emergencies. And I've also had training in, this is bad, sorry. Yeah, like explosives course so that we can understand when we go to a scene what we see. Like, there are trainings I've taken with DHS, FBI, DOD, things I've had in the past. And so coming in as this new guy, and I bring up something, and they're like, you don't know anything, you just got out of school. Okay, I got to have my New York State EMT basic, yeah, but I have years of experience in other things with the federal government.
Yeah.
And, it's, I mean, I don't have a big ego, so I don't care. Like, to me, it was more of an irritation that if we're having this mentality with new people, this is going to affect a lot of people down the line. Like, me personally, I don't gonna be arrogant. I don't care what you think of me. Like, what you see is what you get, and if you show me respect, I'm going to show it right back. That's the Texan in me again. So,
but you're also a grown up. And you realize that while they don't know you, that's it. That's all this is. They just don't know you, but you also know what you bring to the table. And it's only a matter of time before your multiple careers or exposures, all of that experience is going to bubble to the top. It's just going to be a matter of how many times you're going to go on scene with XYZ, and they're going to realize, oh, he's just new here, not new to the game. But that mentality of eating our young, if you will, they take that. Let me back up. You can handle it, you can process it, you can get past it, and you can still thrive because you've had another life or multiple lives. But the newest of the new don't feel that way. They get shut down immediately because they just got out of school, as if a good idea is not possible from them. And we cripple the profession regardless of the discipline. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. And, there's a lot of instances of that mentality too. Their example. Sorry, I don't mean to just one other example that's important for this is
no. Go. I'm loving.
One of the previous agents I worked for, really nice older guy, new to the profession. He was, early 30s. And another thing that I'm huge on that we do poorly up here is that instant debriefing for an incident. And if it's a bad incident, the standard should be to do a critical incident stress debriefing, right? When you have something that is horrific or traumatizing, usually pediatric calls, things that are very emotional, those should have a critical stress debriefing, incident stress debriefing, sorry. And we had an incident where this guy, good provider, coming out, he had a bad call and reached out to one of the officers of the agency saying, hey, I'm having a hard time mentally processing this. And they didn't act on it. They didn't really take it seriously. And because a lot of the guys that were there were the old timers who have found their ways of processing. And I didn't find out till weeks later because he was one of the guys who would normally ride third on our rig to get experience. I was like, hey, I don't have to say names. So where'd so-and-so go? And they're like, oh, he's no longer riding. I'm like, well, what do you mean he's no longer riding? So I called him and I was like, hey man, what's going on? And he's like, I can't do this. We had that call a couple weeks ago. I reached out to the officers. I'm not getting help. I'm having a hard time processing this. And I realize this is not the career for me because if I can't get the support I need from my colleagues, I don't want to do this.
Agreed.
100%. I'm sorry you had that experience. I wish you would have brought it up to me earlier. I'm here for whatever you need to talk about, but I fully support your decision to pull out. And that also, echo what you were saying, we eat our young. If we don't help guide them either, we're dooming them to failure again.
Yeah. And we're hurting the profession. We don't think because we're so exclusive in our thinking. We don't realize that we are doing damage to our discipline, regardless of what it is, whether it's municipal or not, whether it's private or not, doesn't matter. If it is essential, if it is public safety, public care in any way, we really should be more responsible in the way that we treat the newest of the new that come through. It makes me think about, Gary, the last episode that we filmed with checking in with other people.
Absolutely.
And it
Yeah.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't take an app or some, amazing product, which those are all great, but it doesn't take all of that for us to check in on one another. And we always have this horrible, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a cancer, expecting the newest of the new to adapt, and we haven't given them any tools.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if they're not able to adapt, we say, you're not cut out for it. And how would we possibly know that if we've not invested anything in them?
Absolutely. And, we don't know what skill set they can bring to the table that would be very beneficial in the long run, but maybe growing up they
Hmm.
didn't have the extra coping skills to deal with something. And that's really
Sure.
part of our training that we should be helping them along. As you mentioned earlier, it's cheesy, but we're all a big family. We have to treat it that way.
It absolutely is true, because when in the world of first responders, a mentor of mine always says, no one will take care of us the way we can take care of us. And if we don't do that, it's no wonder our numbers are dwindling steadily. It's no wonder we're losing members of our family, our extended family. We're losing them to suicide or to other careers that are not as worthwhile or fulfilling for them. But they get out of this one because they don't have the support.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have chewed off one of their legs, which is what we do.
Well, yeah. It's
Irritates me, makes me crazy.
yeah, I mean,
Ah.
absolutely. And once again, that I'm not trying to sound negative here. I'm really not. But
This show is about being completely real. So if you don't, I will.
no, I appreciate it. So, one of the other things too that is kind of a hindrance, at least for up here, for having them all be non-essential service, and you're talking about supporting each other, is pay. Because here in New York State, the pay is there's a very wide range, and it's very low.
Really?
It is, and to put in perspective, there are some like mom and pop companies up here that run grocery stores or convenience stores that you can get paid more than being an EMT basic or an advanced EMT. It's one of the things that feeds into itself to develop more problems. I mean, as you mentioned too beforehand, like I'm a single dad. I got a 10-year-old boy. Before all this came along, EMS was my main career. Granted, that required me working 3 or 4 agencies, working many hours to make it financially feasible. But once having my son and also battling through cancer, like I need healthcare, I need other options, and most EMS agencies don't offer healthcare. So that's why.
Wait. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, most agencies don't offer healthcare. If you are part
You
of
don't
one of
say
those
it.
large,
That's a shame.
it is, and if you're part of one of those larger fire departments mentioned earlier, like like the city ones, Glens Falls, Saratoga, Clifton Park, Albany, Troy, they all offer benefits packages, but for the most part, it's hard because agencies can't afford to provide that, and you run into this issue where you have good providers working multiple agencies, usually pulling 36-hour shifts, sometimes back to back. So now we introduced a whole new issue into the fold. So besides them being financially stressed and trained, now you're having someone come from one agency to another who just pulled a 36-hour shift, may or may not have had rest on it, and now they're coming to this 36-hour shift to treat patients. So once again, we get into the situation where what we're doing is not beneficial to our patients and our community. And we are stuck in this loop. If there was a way to financially, not supplement, but if we can pay people better, I think in the long run, you're going to see a lot of a long-term improvement for EMS across the board, because you're going to have people who are doing it for, it can support their family, if you can have benefits, and you can not have to work 3 agencies, 4 agencies at 36-hour shifts a week for each. You'll start to have a lot larger pool of people who want to stay. And
Yeah.
the number of good providers that I've seen gotten out of this and gone to a quote unquote normal job to support their family, we've lost a lot of good providers just to that. I mean,
Yeah.
I miss
You're
doing
losing
this
the
every day.
passion. Yeah, you miss the passion, you miss um the desire to serve. And I don't care if it sounds corny, but the truth is, when you're talking about disciplines that are as taxing as these are, you need it to be about more than just money, but you also need it to pay enough money that people don't have to worry about money, and make that be the reason that they have to choose whether they're going to stay or whether or not they're going to go. That's a shame.
It,
That's so unfortunate.
it is. I mean, Gary and I had this conversation probably 6 months ago, because we have to recertify our card every 4 years, and mine's coming up to be expired here in April. And I was seriously considering about just letting it lapse, and I can't, because it's gonna sound cheesy and corny. Like, this is kind of what feeds my soul. You know,
Absolutely.
I have other jobs that will put money in the bank, so I have food on the table, clothes on my kids' back, a roof over our heads. But at the end of the day, I don't actually feel like I'm accomplishing or making a difference day to day in the world. And for me, if you don't have
Absolutely.
that, that's what drives me. I have to know that I'm leaving a good impact on the world to make it a better place.
Hmm.
And one of my favorite quotes, Muhammad Ali, service to others is the rent we pay for our stay here on earth. And
Nice.
I wholeheartedly
Well
believe
said.
that. And so I decided, okay, I can't let my card lapse. I got to keep doing this. And I'm still doing it on the weekends, but I miss doing it during the week. Um,
Yeah.
it's just, it's different.
You need providers, and you need look, you need people who serve others to do it, because you can always pay a bunch of people a bunch of money, but then it's like teachers. We back up. It's like teachers. It's like that conundrum with teachers. Teachers should be making ridiculous amounts of money, right? They should, because they teach all of us. It should not be nearly broke. But the problem you run into is, do you want to pay them so much money that now you have a bunch of teachers that are in it strictly for the money? And now you don't have teachers that really want to nurture our younger people. So it's a catch 22. And the same is true. You want teachers to be in the profession because they love it, but they have to be there in order, well, they have to be able to survive. So it's literally, it's a hamster wheel, because you need to be able to feed your soul, but you also got to feed your kid. But you don't want to just feed your kid at the expense of your soul. It's
It
a hamster
is.
wheel.
You know, it's a complex problem that I think we need to actually sit down and someone needs to take a serious look at it, because you're right. You got to find that fine line of being able
Hmm.
to pay people who want to be there, but not make it so lucrative that people just do it for the money, and then the lose side. I mean, I guess one difference between teachers and EMS, in my opinion, is um, teachers, people can be a poor teacher and stay in the industry and still teach. Eventually, if you're a provider that's doing it for the money, you're going to run into something that's going to change your mind real quick about doing your job.
That's
I mean,
true.
there's only
That's
so many
very true.
time you get puke on your pants and boots or blood everywhere before you're like,
That's
screw
true.
this.
I'm
That's
going to go
true.
work at
Uh, but-
McDonald's.
exactly. And this is health care, though. You don't want people in it that are stressed about rent or their light bill. I need you to have the home front be so secure that when you get on the truck, whatever you call it, that's the only thing you have to worry about. So when you roll up on me or anybody that I love with limbs in the wrong place, I need you not to be bitter because you can't pay your rent.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Ugh,
Absolutely.
this is a whole other hour.
But yes, I think that is probably drawing us close to our hour.
Fine.
Sorry.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating conversation. I kind of thought we talked more about life on a rig, but that's one of the cool things about Lifeline. We kind of just go where the conversation takes us, I think.
Well, if you ever get bored,
That just means we have to come back.
there you
That
go.
just
If you want
means
an
he has to
encore.
come back. And exactly, that's how that works. And we just see where it takes us, and maybe there might be another episode. Who knows? We'll talk about the truck next time. Is it a rig or a truck or what do you call it?
It's depending where you go. It's the same thing people call it. Is it a stretcher? Is it a cot? It's depending where you're at. So it's both.
Huh. They call it a stretcher?
Some people call it a stretcher. Some people call it a cot.
Ah.
Not the ambulance. They call
mean-
it the thing you take somebody on.
Oh,
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
'cause I was like, wait a minute. How does that work?
Two separate thoughts. Sorry.
It's not hard to confuse me. It's true. Okay,
But
carry on, Gary.
But we appreciate you all for joining us today on this fascinating and twisty conversation. And Al, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights. We very much appreciated that.
it's my pleasure. Thank you guys for
It was
having
an
me.
absolute pleasure. Loved it.
If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure you like and subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. From all of us at Lifeline 911, I'm Gary,
I'm Erica.
and we will see you next week.
Thank you for watching our production of Lifeline 911. If you have any questions about today's topic or topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please reach out to us at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. This has been a production of Lifeline 911 Podcast, copyright 2025. From all of us at Lifeline, stay safe out there. And until next time, this is Lifeline 911 signing off.